crashes at signalized intersections, both just in the Denver region and broader nationally, internationally. And I wanted to call out Greg McKinnon because he has made sure that I don't make a fool of myself as I try to explain some of these very complex traffic operations terms. So Greg, if there's anything I misspeak about, please jump in and correct me. All right, so why are we talking about left turns at traffic signals? Well, at the last meeting, if you weren't here, we had a Mentimeter survey where we asked what are people interested in learning more about and what should these meetings comprise of? There's a lot of interest in continuing discussions about traffic signal operations, about hearing from other local governments, and about hearing best practice guidance. So in the Denver region, left turn crashes at intersections is a focus type in every place type that we have. And there are about 4-ish of these focus crash types in each of these place types. And approach turn crashes is the only one that is a focus crash type in every single one of them. 11% of all fatal and severe crashes in the Denver region involve a vehicle making a left turn at a signalized intersection. So while 10% is not every crash in the Denver region, we are not solving every crash today, it is a relatively high percentage at a pretty defined location and making a pretty defined movement. The need to develop a left turn policy was identified at several working groups that Eric and I attend with local governments who are developing their own safety action plans. So we heard the need for guidance on how to make decisions around left turn phasing identified by multiple cities. And just through my conversations, there did seem to be a low level of awareness of CDOT's left turn guidance, and it seemed like it could be a good place for some of these cities to start as they look at developing their own policies. Now, there are many sources of left turn crashes at intersections. You can have rear ends, you can have side swipes, but the most severe, the ones that really result in fatal and severe, tend to be the opposing left turn conflict crashes. So when a left turning vehicle is hit by a vehicle coming from the opposing direction, and then when a left turning vehicle strikes a pedestrian. Why? Because there's left protection. The sides of vehicles have less protection than the fronts and rears of vehicles, and pedestrians certainly have less protection. There's a greater speed differential between pedestrians and between oncoming vehicles, and the impact angle results in a greater kinetic energy transfer. So now that we know what the issue are, how do we look at approaching it? So we look at the safe systems approach, which says that death and serious injury is unacceptable, humans make mistakes, and humans are vulnerable. So in order to prevent these severe crashes from happening and to make them less severe, we need to build in layers of redundancy. Now there's this great graphic that FHWA has about, okay, well, how do you actually anticipate human error and accommodate human injury tolerances? You can separate users in space, users in time, reduce speed. Today we'll be really focusing on separating users in time, but as this slide shows, there's a lot of different potential countermeasures. Some of them address separating users in time, some of them address impact speeds. Today we're talking about the top two. The reason for that being that at least one of them, but kind of both of them, have a pretty high crash reduction factor at a relatively low cost. And these are all countermeasures that are intended to address these opposing left crashes and left turn pedestrian crashes. Now there's also converting green ball signal head to flashing yellow arrow, which I think everybody should just be doing systemically. There's leading pedestrian intervals, which was discussed a couple meetings ago. There's the next one, which I almost dare not say because I know it just can be very offensive, split phasing. But as you go down, there are some that are also very effective, but they can just cost a little bit more money. So today we're going to be talking about a couple different types of left turn signal phasing. So changing permissive left turn control to protected permissive, and then protected permissive to protected only. Now, what do all these protected permissive terms mean? So protected only, when you have a protected only signal phase, left turns can only be made on the green arrow, and it is an exclusive phase separate from pedestrians and opposing traffic. Now, when you have protected permissive, left turns get an exclusive phase where they're separate from other traffic, but then they can also make lefts when they have usually a flashing yellow arrow, and they try to find gaps in opposing through traffic. Then there's also finally permissive only, and that is when left turns do not receive any sort of protected time, and they have to find gaps in opposing through traffic in order to turn left. Now let's talk about the pros cons of these different options. So I apologize for the text. Greg was like, you got to reduce it, but I felt like it was all very important. So here it is, Greg, I'm sorry. When it comes to reducing crashes, the more protection, the better. So going from permissive only to protected permissive, you can get a 12% reduction in fatal injury crashes. In fatal and injury crashes, and a 70 to 100% reduction in left turn crashes. Several studies note that you really don't want to go from protect only back to protected permissive because it usually increases left turn crashes. And almost all literature shows that leading protected left turn phasing has lowest crash rate. Now, having said that, when it comes to minimizing delay and improving signal progression, protected permissive is usually better than protected only. So you can start to see where a need for a decision-making criteria comes into play and could be useful. Now, before we get in, I hand it over to CDOT. I wanted to note a couple things that have just come up in various discussions. So one is about how do you decide between protected lefts and LPIs? So in conducting research and putting together all the sources for this presentation, I found there's really only one research study that was rigorous enough to develop a crash modification factor. And it found that protected left turn phasing did not have a statistically significant impact on vehicle pedestrian crashes, which seems to defy logic. And that was kind of noted by the researchers. They found that LPIs were more effective, but they noted that just there's a need for a lot more scientific research with these large sample sizes to further improve and develop a crash modification factor. Another thing to note is avoiding the yellow trap. Now, I tried to explain the yellow trap to Eric, and I just really, I was unsuccessful. And basically, it's a very, you need to see it to understand it, but all the traffic engineers should know what I'm talking about on here. And if anybody has a way to succinctly describe this, please let me know, or has a video of it. Feel free to drop in the chat, but I'm really talking to the traffic engineers here, where essentially something that I was surprised by is NCHRP report has found that lead lag phasing, which is what occurs when you do to get the yellow trap, cannot be done safely if protected permissive left turn control is in use. And the different studies also indicated that even with the flashing yellow arrow, it can still be an issue. Now, another one that's come up a lot is what do you do at double left turn lanes? So when you have two left turn lanes, FHWA has a signalized intersections informational guide. And in that, there's fairly limited research, but there is a lot of sort of interviews. And they reported that most agencies they interviewed operate as protected only. Now, Tucson does use protected permissive, but they offset the lanes to improve sight distance. You can kind of see in the image this like double yellow, or this double line next to the left turns, and that's like the offset distance. There was a study from Atlanta that essentially found that caution should be used when considering protected permissive if it's at a non-offset intersection. Again, the research here is pretty limited and it's mostly anecdotal. All right, so in conclusion, in summary, left turns are a major factor in severe crashes in the Denver region, and this is the case generally nationwide as well. Implementing traffic control changes can be a low-cost, high-benefit way to address these crashes. The greater the protection of left turn signal control, the better the safety, but it can come with trade-offs in efficiency. And establishing a policy can help ensure engineers and technicians make decisions that reflect the community's priorities and goals. Okay, Greg, did I miss anything? Did I do okay? Oh, I think you're muted. Okay. I heard Greg that I did okay.
Oh, Catherine, I think you're muted.
Man, you'd think after, so many years of using Teams, I would have figured this out, but okay. So, like I mentioned, there's a lot of cities that are interested in developing their own policy. And so, to give them ideas to think about, I wanted to introduce everybody to Colorado DOT's left turn treatment guidelines. And here to talk about that is Diane McHale with Consor. Diana, feel free to
All
take it
right.
away.
Thank you. So I have my coworker George Shackle here with me. We will describe the project that we did and talk about some of the details. There is a lot of information on these slides, and we are going to try to stay on schedule. So we will arrange with Catherine and Eric to get these sent out to you so that you surely will not be able to read everything as it as it flies by on the screen. But a little bit of a background, this is a project that George and I did in 2022, 2023 for David at CDOT headquarters. They were really looking for a guidance document that would apply to all of the regions of Colorado and the very varying situations, urban, suburban, mountain, rural, all the different kind of intersections that really encompass our state. They had sort of a memo with a flow chart in it with some specific sort of situations, and they really wanted to sort of get some more supporting information and really build out the background and give the regions a little bit more detail in exactly how to evaluate an intersection. So we ended up sort of making a flow chart with two distinct areas. The first level of evaluation sort of applies to every intersection and left turn situation. It goes through some safety and geometric criteria, sight distance and speed limits, and then lanes and volumes. And then from there, we go to an existing signal with no left turn phasing, so just permissive only, or if there's an existing signal with protected permissive left turn signal phasing, how to evaluate those. So I know this is small and I'm sure you can't read it, but we'll send it out. This is basically what we landed on. We thought it was really helpful to track exactly where each of our different criteria came from for current users and also people in the future who stumble upon this and say, gosh, where did they ever come up with that? These green boxes were sort of original CDOT guidance that they had included in their memo that they wanted to make sure moved forward. FHWA guidance, as Catherine mentioned, they have a detailed left turn evaluation flow chart, and some of that criteria was pulled through. And then these blue boxes are sort of ped bike guidance to get that in, be able to use those factors in evaluation throughout. So we are going to talk just a little bit in the specifics sort of about the different categories, starting with the bicycle and ped safety, and I'm going to hand it off to George.
Thanks, Diana. Yeah, so the first three I think I'm touching on here are the ped bicycle and crash criteria. A lot of these factors are a mix of reactive and proactive criteria. So on the next slide, we'll see some of the background on those three items. And a lot of these will typically land on protected only. And there is a caveat at the end for time of day, but I'll go over that briefly at the end. So pedestrian criteria, maybe some of you are familiar with the vehicle cross product criteria in the FHWA guidance. This is kind of builds on that and uses that for some pedestrian criteria. So conflicting left turn volumes with pedestrian crossings. The second criteria is some bicycle criteria and kind of has a combination of who's making the turn, where they're making the turn, onto what facility, and how many are making those turns. And if those criteria are met, protected protected only phasing is recommended. And then there's that crash criteria that comes from the FHWA guidance. This one uses a little bit more of a conservative estimate here, instead of I believe the other one. This was originally for protected permitted, but this one we decided to go with applying these crash rates to protected only. Then the next three criteria are sight distance and speed limits. These come pretty much straight from the FHWA traffic signal timing manual. The sight distance available to vehicles making left turns with opposing speed limits. If that sight distance cannot be met, check if whatever's inhibiting that sight distance can be removed as part of this criteria. So if it can be removed, you'd continue moving down the flow chart. If it can't, you'd install protected only phasing. And then the opposing traffic speed limit. This one was originally in the CDOT guidance, and we decided to split it out into situations for both urban and suburban. So the opposing speed limits are pretty high, makes those turns difficult, leading to protected only phasing if they are at or higher than these thresholds. The next criteria on the list here are the number of turn lanes. What kind of facilities are these turn lanes opposing, and some volume criteria here. So if you have 3 or more left turn lanes, protected only right off the bat. If it's if it's a dual left turn, it depends on what the opposing movements are. So if it's a left turn on a major street and the opposing speed limit is greater than 35 miles per hour, it goes to protected only. And then if you have duals on the side streets and the speed limit is higher than 35, protected only. And then peak hour volumes there, if it's greater than 2 vehicles per cycle, which is kind of assuming those 2 can get through on the yellow, protected permitted phasing should be considered after all those other criteria have not been met. And then the final portion of the flow chart is there a new signal being installed? If so, there are other criteria to look at. The safety criteria in this flow chart should always be looked at. New intersections, old intersections, if those criteria are met, can lead to protected only phasing. And then, as I mentioned earlier, some of that time of day criteria. So if you meet protected only, but let's say, I guess the first example, the pedestrian one, meets it only in the morning, the AM period, you could consider protected only by time of day.
Okay, so then once you've sort of evaluated those details for each intersection, you sort of enter the second stage of the flow chart. So these were also meant to sort of apply to development situations where it's development, or maybe an intersection that's not currently signalized. You would have those sort of static details to be able to evaluate. But if it's already an intersection, that's signalized and does not have any left turn phasing, CDOT wanted to be able to look at some of the FHWA criteria and be able to take those into consideration. So we have the sort of typical peak hour volume cross product calculation. And then we also have a delay factor where if certain type of intersection characteristics and that left turn just has a really high delay, either greater than 35 seconds per vehicle or greater than 2 vehicle hours, then you should look at providing that protected permitted phasing. And then our last use case is an existing intersection with protected permitted phasing already. So if you have not met anything yet, but there is protected permitted phasing, what could sort of trigger a protected only recommendation, and CDOT wanted to, this was part of CDOT's original guidance, was to be able to use that level of service of safety. So does this, looking at more detailed crash data, is there a higher incidence of those approach turn crashes? And does it have the LOSS that's greater than 2? So just a refresher, if that's not on the top of your head, there's four levels for the level of service of safety. A level 3 and 4 is a higher than expected for that intersection or roadway type. So yeah, that is the summary basically of the project. Was just in summary, CDOT was looking to be able to provide some document that was not a formal adopted policy, but to be able to provide regions with some clear guidance on how to evaluate and adjust their left turn phasing if they needed to. And I think we have some time for questions. I'm not sure how actually we're
Yes.
getting on time.
Yes, we have time for questions.
While people think of questions, I can just say that we have been able to apply this guidance to different intersections around the region, and it has been really interesting to see what sort of situations will, you know, lead an intersection to be have the phasing changed. Sometimes it's clearly a time of day or, you know, driver confusion that is leading us to recommend changing the phasing. Sometimes it's volume and delay. It's all kinds of reasons that are addressed in the flowchart have come up. Yeah, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering, is there a certain amount of illumination that is also recommended for those protected left turns? You know, how much overhead light? I mean, obviously you can't make it crazy, but I'm just wondering if there's a good range for safety.
That is a great question. And I definitely do not have the answer to that. We didn't see in any of our research at FHWA, at least, or any of the peer cities that we referenced, didn't have any lighting recommendations. I wonder if the MUTCD does.
I also know that there's some guidance in the FHWA signalized intersections informational guide. I think there's some discussion about lighting levels as well in there, so that could be another source.
So Greg says in the chat, are the regions employing the guidance? How about local agencies? I can't speak to the individual regions. I know that we have had a few task orders through HQ on supporting them with we're evaluating a few intersections in Region 1 right now, and we've also done Region 3. Yeah, maybe David can speak up to that. Thanks.
Yeah,
David.
I'll chime in. So, you know, we disseminated these guidelines to the regions. They may have done some of the work in-house potentially, but we've also, with our task orders, sorry, I didn't realize my thing was closing the camera, but with our task orders, we've also offered to the regions that we have this available for them to use, that we can either do it in-house or we can have a consultant do it. So we've had Consor do several, like Diana was saying, for Region 3. Those initial ones we did for Region 3 were basically just essentially a quick report following the guidelines. I'm also working with Consor right now to do a more detailed kind of left turn study analysis using more kind of more data points. So we're doing some in Region 1 right now. Last fiscal year, we had DIAXIS look at all of the Region 1 intersections for locations where there were statistical outliers for certain crash patterns. So broadside crashes, approach turns, rear ends, etc. And so right now I'm going through all the approach turn locations and working with Consor to evaluate a number of them using left turn guidelines, then also using things like ATS-PM data, some of the other big data sources we have, to also provide other additional context as well, and creating kind of a more robust report. And that's something that I can share sometime in the future once we kind of get it wrapped up, if anyone's interested. But yeah, I think that's kind of the extent of how they've been used so far.
Like we've got a question from Matt. Is there a consideration for adding a minimal or subminimal category, at which point the recommendation would be for a complementary facility for bike ped users?
So to make sure I understand, do you mean like the recommendation would be to actually like add a bike lane?
No,
Or
a
a bike
separated
lane?
facility or a grade separated facility? Or you just look at the travel shed and you'd say you're better off going somewhere else?
You know, I think this document really was just guiding towards the left turn phasing. I think that there probably are, I think the planners in our office would have different support on when those, when you might, you know, sort of like bike thresholds on when you might be classified as a, you know, bidirectional bike facility or separated. I do know that both Denver and Boulder have supporting documents such as this one, and I know the first level of analysis is if you have a left turn that's crossing a bidirectional bike facility, such that you could be taking a left and a bike could be coming up from behind, then it's just a mandatory protected only, because you really can't see when the bike is coming up behind you. But as far as guiding you towards when to put that bike facility in, I'm sure there's a document out there that discusses that, but I don't know.
Thank you.
Sure. Alexandra?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for that question, Matt. I must admit that the bike part of this went by so fast that I need to listen to the recording before I can fully take all that in. But it did bring up some questions. Like it seemed like it was implying that cyclists are only at certain intersections, which is not, cyclists are everywhere. And that, does it take in, it seemed like with sight distances from the motorist, but there's always, and you read this in almost so many crash reports, they looked, but they didn't see the cyclist for various reasons. It's easy for cyclists to be hidden behind something because of it's such smaller width than another type of vehicle. All those things, I'm just wondering, were those things considered? And is this, yes, that's my questions. Thanks.
Yeah, so what I will say is that if you do a peer review of different cities, and George really did the deep dive into the peer review, so he may be able to supplement better, but there are agencies, LA and Portland come to mind, where they have extremely detailed evaluation and criteria and sort of like grading, and they take a lot more focus into the ped and bike interaction. And I think that what CDOT was trying to do here was think about the whole state and all of the intersections. And so they're not, they didn't want to force a rural region to update all their phasing for a situation that might be not apply to them, and apply more to a like urban intersection. So you can look more into it, and the bike reference came, it looked like, from Portland and from Massachusetts. They had a separated bike lane planning and design guide. And so it has to do with like how many turning lanes of vehicles and how many bicycle lanes, and are they 2 lanes and 1 way, and the number of vehicles per hour crossing over. So I think we didn't see anything that was actual bike sight distance, but that might be more in, this is specifically talking about that left turn phasing. So I think like a bike planning guide may have more guidance and information on planning, on improving sight distance for the bikers and the drivers.
All right, well, I have a question.
Yeah.
Were there any challenges when you tested out using the guidelines or anything that could be challenging if a smaller local government was wanting to take up these guidelines? Like I'm thinking about, data collection or data availability, anything like that.
I think with your basic turning movement count, counting peds and bikes, that a local agency should be able to, when you get into the delay, that can be harder. You might need a synchro model to actually sort of model that and estimate what it is. But I think it's meant so that the actual, that whole first part of the evaluation flow chart is specifics. So it's like lanes, speed limits, sight distance, volumes. Those I think are pretty available to a smaller agency, should be able to sort of get that information together.
And level of service of safety, is that?
So that comes from David mentioned that DIAX's software, which is a software that George is going to be able to describe this better than me.
It looks at the crashes and you can rank it based on the expected crashes at a facility type. I think CDOT has a spreadsheet that has safety performance functions built into it, and you could enter your crash information, your volume information, and you can also get LOSS that way. So if DIAXIS isn't available for it, or there's limited information as far as crashes go available in DIAXIS, you can use that spreadsheet. So I think that is a good way to determine the LOSS. And I think that last one's really good for more rural regions where you might not have the volume to see the crash history be met, like 4 crashes in 12 months. Maybe the volumes just aren't high enough where you'd expect that many crashes. But if you have that criteria met for the 5 crashes over 5 years, and you can use your LOSS and find that the intersection you're looking at has higher crash rates than expected for that facility type and volumes, it could lead to protected phasing. And you'd only really need the crash data and the crash data and volumes for that location. So I think a lot of the times those data sets are typically available.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for one more final question, and then we have to get to our next section. Okay, well, thank you, Diana. Thank you, George. Oh, Zeke, did you have one really fast?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if Lisa still had her hand up, so I wasn't going to chime in. But just real quick, I wanted to ask a question about the signage that's associated with flashing yellow arrows. So here in Douglas County, we're going towards, I think, like a lot of agencies, going to that as our standard. And what we found is they're so prevalent throughout the region and frankly throughout the country now that we're not including the R10-12 or the R10-12A signs that are a should recommendation with MUTCD. And that sign is basically to say left turns must yield on flashing yellow arrow. I just wanted to ask the group if other agencies are taking a similar approach, or are they still using the signs? And if so, have they seen a change in crash patterns or any research that suggests including the sign leads to a better crash or safety outcome, or excluding it is neutral? Because that's the direction that we've gone.
I can speak to that one for Lakewood. So, yeah, we don't put up the signs at all. We find that the signal head itself with the left turn arrow is essentially giving the indication to a driver that it's a left turn. And we're actually pretty conservative about the signs that we do put up on the mast arms because we don't want anything conflicting with the signal indication. I don't know that we have actual statistics on seeing a reduction, but that has been our practice.
Chiming in, this is Anna with Centennial. We also do not use signage. I have some legacy stuff out there that we'll be removing at some point in time, but when I put in my first flashing yellow arrow display in 2008, we took a very measured approach, including some public outreach and things, and deliberately did not use the sign, which was not really a thing also at the time. And the feedback from the constituents, from the public, was that they if they were uncertain what to do, then they tended to increase their hesitation and not go. And that's obviously a good failure, such as it is. But I think that was consistent with the findings of the NCHRP report prior to the inclusion in the MUTCD as a standard display, and what Boulder had found and others at the time. So, we don't do obey the law type signs. I'm not a fan also of like left turn yield on green ball, for those legacy locations. Drivers have a responsibility, and I really like them paying attention to the display and any conflicting traffic, rather than trying to read a sign. Totally aside from also any English or comprehension issues, graphic signs are better than worded signs.
All right. Well, thank you guys. There'll still be opportunity for more questions as we get into our panel discussion as well.
Sorry,
Yes.
Catherine. I just
Yeah.
saw one question in the chat. With
Oh.
flashing yellow arrow, have you considered the protected by presence of pedestrian? That's not included in this flow chart. That's sort of operational specific, but I know that I have seen that programming out there. I think Aurora had some locations where if the PED button is pushed, just the protected comes up and no flashing yellow arrow. So it is a possibility.
Thank you for catching that question. All right, so now we're going to move into our panel discussion, and this is essentially just to get some additional local government perspectives on left turn signal control and phasing decisions. So I am joined by Anna Bunce, who you just heard from City of Centennial. She's the city traffic engineer. Kelly Doon, the transportation engineering manager, City of Lakewood. And we were supposed to be joined by Veronica Sun, transportation engineer with City of Boulder. I think there might have been a mix-up though, and I don't believe that she is on yet, which is a bummer, but we'll continue onwards. And I think what I was hoping to get out of this panel was just to hear kind of perspectives at a high level of how you make decisions when there are sometimes trade-offs like this, for example, like operational efficiency and safety. How do you strike the best balance, or how do you make decisions? And hoping to get perspectives on people who are at potentially different levels of having a policy formalized to see if it's useful or not, and then also just at different levels of their career to see, especially from like younger perspectives, if it's helpful to have these policies, as well as for leaders. So, all right, Anna and Kelly, thank you guys so much for agreeing to do this. I promise this is not intended to be a gotcha. The goal is whatever you say, I'm sure numerous people on here will relate to and will understand. And so it's really just to help get the conversation going and hopefully spur more questions and just thoughts. So my first question, and I'm going to start with Anna and then go to you, Kelly. What is your approach to determining if an intersection should potentially have a left turn phasing change? Should potentially go from permissive to permissive protective? Where do you start? What do you do?
Sure. So in my almost 4 years now, which is hard to believe at Centennial. We have not as yet formalized a policy in terms of a flow chart or something, but if we were going to be making that consideration, it would be things I think similar to the CDOT policy or practice as far as, cross product, crash history, visibility, speeds, number of lanes to be crossed, all of those things should factor in, but absent that sort of official documentation, which again, for us would probably consist of a flow chart if we were to adopt it, but it would really be for internal use only and more as a guidance than a prescription. It's really on a case by case basis. I mean, fortunately, we have relatively low enough number of intersections, signalized intersections that, if we have an uptick in our collaboration with the sheriff's office and our review of crash history and things that we just look at that. One of the challenges currently, though, is we do have a lot of legacy stuff since the city only incorporated in 2001. So we have a lot of pre-existing equipment and a lot of 5 sections out there. And so for that flexibility, trying to determine where to retrofit and prioritize the flashing yellow arrow display installation to give us time of day flexibility has been part of our consideration. So we did some upgrades last year and some retrofits, and we're still continuing to assess that. So.
All right, Kelly.
I'm basically going to echo everything Anna said. Lakewood also doesn't have a formal policy, but the types of things we consider are very similar to what we heard with the CDOT approach there. So anything with 3 approach lanes, if our 85th percentile is 45 miles an hour or more, looking at that cross product rule for the volumes. I guess specifically, we've only looked at it for vehicles. I hadn't seen the pedestrian or the bicycle cross product before, so glad that I learned something today. And then again, sight distance. So if we have vertical hills, horizontal curvature, anywhere that we might see a sort of shadowing where an approaching vehicle might be hiding another vehicle behind it. And then also anywhere with dual lefts, those are going to be protected 24/7. And we're also really focused on intersections with negative offsets that also cause that driver visibility concern. Any intersection with a negative offset, we protect 24/7.
Thanks. And I know Boulder has an adopted policy. If anybody's able to track down any sort of link to it or information on it and could drop it in the chat, that'd be great. That's what I was hoping it to have that perspective also to be able to take the brunt of my next question, which is how many crashes is enough to warrant protected only phasing by time of day? Kelly, you want to go first this time?
Sure. We're looking for about 5, but again, that's very context specific. If it's a high volume arterial intersection, then 5 might be more typical. But if we're looking at an arterial and a minor collector where our volumes are lower and we're seeing 5 of those approach turn crashes, then that's really telling us that something's going on there.
Okay, so you don't have a formal policy, but there's sort of a
we'll call it an informal
internal
number.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure everybody listening that's probably pretty common about having, something. Anna, does Centennial have anything similar?
My turn to echo Kelly, I guess. I would say 5 is kind of not a bad rule of thumb if we're considering, time of day restrictions. But that's not a hard and fast. We're looking for something that's not an outlier or, a couple of DUIs or, some sort of recurring and possibly trending upwards thing. So it could be less than that. It could be more than that. But it's going to be somewhere probably around there is where we might start looking at doing a deeper dive into patterns and what seems to be happening at a particular location.
And now, do these need to be what is the time frame? Do these need to be 5 in just one direction, or is it for the intersection overall?
For us, I would say 5 in 1 year for the same direction. It wouldn't make any sense if we have 1 for each direction, especially also depending again on volumes and conditions, those really could just be an outlier. Or again, if there's a DUI or red light running or something else going on.
Yeah, agreeing with that with the 5. And that might also, like, looking into the crash history, that might help us determine if it is going to be a time of day restriction, if we're only, seeing those 5 isolated during the AM or the PM hour. But overnight, we know when volumes are lower, we're not going to be seeing that. So we'd definitely be digging in whenever we start to see the pattern.
Right. So that leads to my next question. Do those 5 need to be in, like, grouped into a certain amount of time? Or is it just throughout the day?
I guess if we saw 5 within the past year for the same direction and they were spread throughout the day, that would tell me that there's some sort of geometric concern going on there or something else that's not necessarily time of day. So that, I mean, I'd be curious and want to be digging in a little more, but that might be a candidate for protecting 24/7.
And Anna, is that sort of how you all would approach it as well?
Yeah, it's a context sensitive approach. And we really want to make sure we're doing that deeper dive into descriptions, actual crash descriptions, narratives from the reports, and considering other factors or anything. So it really is a case by case type assessment. Because there are implications and additional work. I mean, if we're going to implement even by time of day, then we need to revisit also our coordination plan programming and the time that is available. If it's going to be protected only, we need to make sure we're providing sufficient and appropriate amount of green time for the demand on that movement, as opposed to the protected permissive, where you're assuming that a portion might be made on the green arrow, but the rest of it can be made in the permissive interval. So there are implications, and we need to assess and make sure we're not just changing the operation without changing the associated timing and operational parameters to make sure that that's successful and safe.
And then to build off something you just reminded me of, Anna, looking at the crash reports, and here at Lakewood, we work very closely with our police department, and sometimes it is PD that brings a crash or a crash pattern to our attention that we haven't heard about yet. If we're hearing from those officers that have responded to the scene to some of these, and I mean, the severity of some of these left turn approach crashes, maybe we've only had 4, but if these are just violent and extremely horrific for the people involved, that's going to be enough to like have us look at this as a more serious issue that, numbers go out the window. We just want to protect our drivers.
Yep, that makes sense. So Kelly, have you had an example or a time when you've changed signal timing and seen a reduction in crashes, or Lakewood has?
Not me personally,
Yeah.
but yes, Lakewood, absolutely. When we started implementing flashing yellow arrows and therefore could start implementing our lagging left turns, we saw a 67% reduction in left turn crashes from that conversion to lagging left turns. So we've definitely seen that substantially throughout the city. We do love our flashing yellow arrows here, but we also do love protected left turns. So there's some locations, like I had mentioned, the offset left turns, intersections where even trying to give drivers a longer permissive window to make the turn or a longer time on the split, they were still misjudging the gap. So we found that you can't necessarily fix a geometric deficiency just by trying to increase green time. So some of those scenarios with the offset left turns, we've seen the reduction in crashes by going to protected only.
Now, Kelly, do you think it's beneficial to have an adopted policy? Even internally, it doesn't have to be, published publicly, to have an adopted policy like CDOTs or boulders?
Policies are good for guidance. I'd just be wary of the potential drawback if it becomes, we become too reliant on it and then it starts to overshadow some of that engineering judgment. Like what I think you guys are hearing from me and Anna is so much of these are context sensitive and really need to dig in and consider all of the drawbacks that might come from going protected only. So overall policy is good, I think, as long as it just doesn't cause us to be too restrictive of making some of our decisions.
And Anna, what do you think?
I think similarly to Kelly, also from an overall workload and prioritization standpoint, since we know the considerations, it's not high on my priority list to go through the exercise of generating that flow chart that we might eventually have. We're functionally applying that whether we've written it down or not. So like I said, we'll probably get there. It won't be probably a formally adopted thing, and like I said, more for internal use and guidance and support, as opposed to something that we might take to, city council or something like that.
All right, well, I could keep going, but instead, in our last 5 or so minutes, I'm going to open it up for other questions. And it looks like Josh, you have your hand raised if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just curious for anyone, for Kelly or Anna or anyone really. Yeah, I completely understand that the prioritization of where my time is spent, where your time is spent. Yeah, is there any sort of like, yeah, are you generally going to change a signal timing or implement a left turn phase change, yeah, based on resident request, like, yeah, complaint driven more so than anything? Do you have like specifically like a button to click on an agency's website of like this phase or this signal needs signal timing adjustment that then trickles down to like help weed out some of the, oh, this uh, intersection is just unsafe, do something about it? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, is there a way that you're filtering? Can somebody request this specifically, or is it just you hear about it through, through the grapevine?
So Lakewood, we have a service portal, web-based, that we try to direct most residents to. And if they pick the right category, it'll come straight to me. But sometimes it might be under, like, a traffic signal concern for left turns might be under transportation safety, so it'll kind of kick around. But anyone here on the team that gets those concerns, and then we kind of dig in, and sometimes reaching out to the residents, seeing what they are actually asking for. Are they asking for head protect, for a flashing yellow arrow? Do they want permissive left turns? Do they want protected left turns? And then to answer your original question, resident concerns maybe help us drive to dig into a location that maybe wasn't on our radar. But 95% of the time, my response to residents is no, this left turn has to stay protected for these reasons, or no, we can't implement a dedicated left turn phase.
Similarly to Kelly, Centennial has a citizen response center that's the live person will answer 24/7, 365. And there's also apps and intakes. So anyone is welcome to ask for anything at any point in time, and we will always review the request. We do not engineer by petition. I hardly ever, I'm going to say maybe never, have had someone ask for a full-time protected only left turn. Occasionally it's the other way around, but because we don't have a lot of protected only full-time operations currently, except at major intersections, most people get that. They can see the volume, they can see the demand. I will note, relative to an earlier question I think that Marnie had in the chat too, our default for left turn for flashing yellow arrow is a ped inhibit on any new installations and moving forward. So if there is a pedestrian movement activated that conflicts with that left turn movement, it will omit the flashing yellow arrow for the entire duration of the pedestrian interval as a default. We're hoping to teach people that if they see a red arrow, that there's a good reason for it. We have a couple of LPIs too, but we're really moving more towards the inhibit on a per cycle basis.
All right. Thank you so much, Kelly and Anna. I know it can be a lot to put yourselves out there, so I appreciate you giving us your time and your insight. So thank you. We got a comment from Carlos asking, will the PowerPoint presentations be available? The answer is yes. We are really going to work going forward to try to get them out after the meetings, but it just is going to take a little bit of time in order to do the required remediation for accessibility. So we will try to get them out. It just bear with us on it, might not be immediate. Okay, let me share my screen again. I'm sorry, everybody. Okay, so the Quick Build Toolkit focus group. So I am, in case you don't remember, last week, our last meeting, we brought up the Quick Build Toolkit, which is a task in the Regional Vision Zero plan. And I asked, is this still of interest to people? Would this still be beneficial? The response was yes, it would still be beneficial. And so I'm looking for 5 to 10 volunteers. And I said local government on the past slide, but it can be county, it can be state, transportation staff that would use the toolkit or have already developed their own toolkits just to help inform the general scope, make sure that we're on the right direction with this product, because it could turn into a number of different things, and I have seen that in other cities. It can be a kind of an informational, educational resource, kind of geared towards the public. It could be a sort of almost list of things that you hand to staff or consultants to go out and check when you're doing a roadway safety audit of, like, here's immediate things that could be accomplished while you develop recommendations and seek funding for longer term improvements. Or it could be some combination of both. And so we just want to make sure we develop the right product for the region. And so I'm really looking for 5 to 10 volunteers. It's just 1 to 2 meetings. I imagine 1 to 2 rounds of just general document review. It shouldn't take up too much of your time. And because there was 10 people at least who voted on this at the last meeting, I know there's interest. So if you were one of those 10, I'm going to ask people to raise their hands or put their names in the chat. Now, if you can be on this focus group. Oh, Cami? Oh, great. Okay, Cami, Michelle, you guys are a yes? Emily? All right, looking for a couple more. All right, guys, we've heard a lot from, okay, Carlos. I'm like, we've heard a lot from the ladies today. Awesome. Okay, feel free to keep adding your name to the chat. Again, this will be brought back to the working group for review and presentation. It's just this initial kind of scope informing that we want a little bit more of a focused input on. Okay, well, that was easier than I thought it would be. So thank you everybody for participating and giving us your time. Yeah, feel free to add if you want to be a part of it in the chat. Okay, now I'm going to hand it over to Byron to talk about the crash data dashboard.
Thanks, Catherine. Let me just share my screen real quick here, make sure that that's visible to folks.
Yep.
Great. So my name, yes, is again, I'm Byron Schultz. I'm a senior GIS specialist here at DRCOG, and I was on the team that helped build the DRCOG crash data dashboard. So I'm just going to take a few minutes today to just talk about our plans to update the dashboard and let you know how you can, this group can provide input into our next version. So this will be a very short presentation. Just advance here. Okay, so just a quick refresher. For those of you who may have forgotten, we have launched a crash data dashboard. This was back in September. We did gather input from this group as well as the crash data consortium. There is some overlap there, but we solicited some input from you all to help build in the functionality. And I'll spare you a demo in the interest of time, but the main functionality in that dashboard, there's a map that you can explore crash points. You can filter by different things like mode or severity or time. By area of interest, you can draw an area of interest and look at that particularly. And it has lots of charts about the different crash types, the vehicle movements, et cetera, that are happening for those crashes that you're filtering to. And then on that dashboard, there's an About tab and video that explains all the functionality in more detail. So I'll drop a link to the dashboard once I'm done here too, so you can either refresh yourself or familiarize yourself with it. But what I wanted to talk about was our plans to update it. So we released it in September, knowing that people would use it and maybe have feedback and that we would incorporate that to tweak it going forward. So right now, I'm presenting just these quick refreshers to both this group and the Crash Data Consortium group. And then we're also requesting 2024 crash data from CDOT very soon. So we'll have that in hand and processed. And then by June, July, probably more like July, sending a survey out to external stakeholders. That includes you, that includes the Crash Data Consortium group, and others that we may reach out to We'll also gather internal DRCOG feedback and just review all of the ideas that you bring up, either issues you find or things you would like to have in the dashboard, and assess what's feasible and figure out what we want to incorporate in the next version. I don't think we're going to be doing a full recreation of the dashboard, but we small changes and changes to some of the filters, things like that, are within scope. And then we'll roll out the new dashboard in September, and it'll have the new data from 2024 going back 5 years to 2020 inclusive. So that's all I wanted to mention, is just that we're doing this. This is the timeline, and we will be sending a survey out to you with questions so that you can provide us your input. So I don't know if there's any time for questions, or if you need to reach out to me, you can. At my email here, and I'll put that in the chat as well. So I can turn it back over to you, Catherine.
Yes, we have time for a question or two if anybody has any.
Okay. All right, not seeing any. Oh, there's one. Michelle.
Yeah, just super quick. You guys used to have a bit more than, I think you had more than 5 years data on there at some point. Is there any hope of that coming back up?
Good
That was
question.
pretty helpful.
Yeah, okay. No, that's good to know. And if others on this call also feel that having data going back farther would be useful, feel free to add that in the survey or tell me now. That's technically possible, and yeah, we'll discuss what the trade-off there is it makes the dashboard slower the more you add, but if it's useful to people, it's something we definitely could consider. So great idea. Thank you for bringing that up. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay. Well, thank you for letting me squeeze in here, Catherine. I can turn it back over.
Yes, thank you, Byron. I'm sorry if I made you feel like you had no time. I was like, we have a full agenda. All right. So last agenda item is the news and updates, starting with the regional SS4A application. So just wanted to update everybody on where we landed with that. This year's title for our project is Safer Streets, Improving Pedestrian and Left Turn Safety in the Denver region. And the kind of project themes we landed on were new mid-block pedestrian crossings on arterial or unsignalized pedestrian crossings on arterial and CDOT roadways, and traffic signal improvements to left turn safety. It includes 8 projects in 8 jurisdictions and about 15 million improvements. And I just want to thank everybody that sent us letters of interest and engaged with us on this. I think in the next meeting or two, I'd be interested in doing some brainstorming a little bit more in advance of the next call for projects to see what would make the most sense for the Denver region, and try to come up with a unified strategy even further in advance. So that'd be great. Also with the Mentimeter survey at the last meeting, I think there's interest in bringing back up an overview of new safety literature. Just there's a lot that comes out, and even for us, it can be so easy to miss. I'm still playing around with what would be the best way to share this information through these meetings. If it maybe is like a Word document that goes out with the agenda. So bear with me, today we just have a couple slides, but these are ones that I felt like if you missed it, they're good to know about. So the Pedestrian Bicycle Information Center had a great webinar on improving pedestrian safety through vehicle design. And I think, with us, it's harder unless you're at the state or federal level to have that much engagement around safe vehicles as part of the safe systems approach. But it's still good to stay involved and see when there is something that we can do, what is that? And so a couple of notable findings I thought was one that AAA tested vehicles' pedestrian detection systems, in the kind of like some of the self-driving modes are almost self-driving. They found that they rarely avoided collision with pedestrians and were essentially completely ineffective at night. And so this is just to say that there's still a long way to go with autonomous vehicles with respect to pedestrian safety, and just if you're in your own driving, use them very cautiously around pedestrians. Another one that came up in multiple sources over the past couple months was intelligent speed assistance. Now that was new to me, and so, but maybe I'm just hadn't been totally with it. And in case you don't know, this is an aftermarket device that can be installed in vehicles to limit speeding. And it's effective at reducing severe speeding, and it's fast to deploy. And it's being implemented not only internationally, but also a lot of states are adopting it. So it's usually being adopted by these states in response to, multiple repeat offenders or people who are doing really high-end speeding, and basically the courts require that they get installed in their vehicles. So that's kind of a legislative approach to ISA. This webinar also talked about safety with regards to large truck design. And the Volt Center, which I hadn't had that much knowledge of it before because I think they do a lot of simulation work, which isn't as often done. And, it's more like aviation, that sort of thing. They found that in 2/3 of large trucks that they tested, like real, truck designs, that the driver cannot see a child in the crosswalk. And in some cases, they couldn't even see an adult. And they found that there are higher crash rates with certain types of trucks, particularly what they call low vision trucks. So the solution that they recommend is greater pursuance of these high vision truck designs. And they rated trucks that exist on their ability to see people in crosswalks. And so that's listed here, just a couple of the ones that rated the best. And so they also talked about where to start with this. And the first kind of initial way to start with this was to lead by example, to implement best practices in public fleets. So that could be adopting these high vision trucks as part of your fleet, and they have lots of examples of and guidance, particularly of it being adopted into fleets in the New York City area and just the process that went into that. But it could also be, I think, installing the ISA in city fleets just to make sure that city drivers are not excessively speeding. They also called out a couple other best practices, which installing truck side guards and right sizing and downsizing large vehicles where possible. So like using light trucks with trailers, things like that. Another NCHRP report that came out recently was this leveraging artificial intelligence and big data to enhance safety analysis. Now, I'm sure many of cities get bombarded with new AI products and offers pretty frequently, and it can be probably kind of challenging to know where to start, what's most useful, how to decide whether a product is going to be beneficial. So it kind of called out when these types of products are most useful. So if there are large amounts of data to identify trends and patterns. But a challenge can be separating usable data from noise because so much data is coming in that a lot of the data points that might be produced, they aren't useful. They don't really mean anything. So it can be a challenge to actually call out what are the performance measures that you want to be tracking with this data. A couple other things I thought were interesting was vehicle-based data they found was better than smartphone data, but there are still a lot of issues with it. You can get insights and it's good for trends, but this data still doesn't provide a full picture of traffic at a given location. So if you want kind of trends or system-wide comparison, that can be good, but specific intersections is where it has challenges. They also identified if you are using surveillance cameras to collect pedestrian data, they had an algorithm that they said really helps. And so this could be something that if you have a vendor that's doing this for you, do they already have this algorithm? Just something to check on. And then they gave some examples of when these tools can make the most sense. So for example, inventorying roadway attributes either for asset management purposes or to use in predicted crash risk analyses, so based off of roadway characteristics, to proactively identify safety needs, so doing things like near miss analyses, and then evaluating pedestrian risk data at intersections, and basically bringing together a whole bunch of data points to identify findings. All right, I realize I went through that pretty fast, so I apologize for that, but just wanted to make sure we had time for our end safety roundtable updates. Eric, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, so
many people have been in these calls before, but we always have some new people. We always do like to end these meetings with just a roundtable to give folks the opportunity to share what's going on. We know that there's a wide range of safety action plans in progress or that have recently wrapped up. We've got, by my count here, 45 people, so we're not going to do a round robin of everybody like at the beginning, but just want to give folks the opportunity to raise your hand if you want to be called on to share anything that your community is working on, or conversely, if there's something that you could use help on from your peers, have any questions, have we got a few minutes here to have that conversation. Okay, C2, I see Michelle first.
Thanks, Eric. Quick thing, our draft safety action plan is up on our website for review. And then I did have a question with Excel doing their really large scale power outages with high winds. I'm wondering if folks are developing, we have a lot of signals that are out, some on state highways, some on major roadways, and it's a little scary. So I'm wondering if anybody's developing policies or educational campaigns or anything around that. Please reach out if you are.
Okay, great. And Michelle, do you have a link to that? If you'd want to, you're fine. You'd like put it for feedback for the plan. Feel free to drop that in the chat. I haven't heard anything about that. That's really interesting though, the power outages, but thanks for bringing that up. And maybe we can reach out to some of our partners at the state who are in that public engagement space, try to find out. And I see Emily.
Hi, everyone. So Littleton is working on a strategic plan for our program called Safer Streets Littleton, which I think is a whole longer conversation, but maybe to like the outsiders and maybe to folks in this group, Safer Streets Littleton sounds like it's our Vision Zero program, but it's not quite that. It is obviously focused on safety, but it's really more focused on our local and neighborhood roads. And we were given a select like sort of pot of funding for this year to focus on it. And I guess my question to the group or needing help with is, I've been having this hard argument, or I mean, it's not argument, but we're trying to figure out how do we have this Safer Streets program that is, the money is allocated towards our local and neighborhood streets, but a lot of the programming and educational efforts realistically are not focused at just our neighborhood streets. So those are, you know, it's a holistic community-wide effort. So how, if any, local agencies are maybe struggling with that type of challenge of there's this push-pull of we understand that our neighborhood streets need to be safer, and that's where a lot of folks are typically walking and riding bikes and whatnot, but we see our serious injuries and fatalities on our larger arterials. And so I don't know what quite the question is, because the strategic plan is really an internal document for us, but I've been trying to I don't know if argue the point is the right way I'm saying this, but try and convince the other folks on my team that we need to be thinking a little bit more holistically with this effort. And if anybody else has kind of come upon these challenges within their work of, you know, there's the push-pull of, you know, we have our neighborhood streets that really need improvement, but that's not where we're actually seeing the data is pulling us. So yeah, I don't know, just if anybody else is really struggling with that, especially pushback maybe from their community or from local elected officials, please reach out, because trying to figure out how to navigate that situation here in Littleton.
All right, it's great. Thanks for sharing that, Emily.
I'm just going to add that, Emily, I think that's a good question, and especially something that for cities that are just starting out on their Vision Zero journey, where previously a lot of resources were probably dedicated to sort of neighborhood traffic calming, and how do you start to carve out space for some of these arterial improvements?
Mhm. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other hands up, but if there's anything else you want us to share, just raise it real quick. But I want to thank you all for joining us. Thanks for the questions and the engagement. Thanks for our volunteers for the Quick Little project. I did note the names from the chat as well, so we will be following up with you shortly on this. And just want to remind everyone that our next original scheduled meeting will be on August 12th. So as always, we do these every other month. So we may be sending out a new calendar series for future meetings. So if you get something from us about that, just we'll cancel this and send that out. So keep that. So be aware of that. If you get a new calendar invite from us, it won't be a surprise, I hope. So again, so hopefully we'll see as many as we can on August 12th. If there's any questions about what we talked about today or connecting with anyone today, any content that they shared or answer any questions, just reach out to myself or Catherine, and we're happy to make those connections. All right, thank you so much, everybody.